I had just come home from surgery, stitches still fresh, ribs aching, and all I wanted was to collapse into my bed. But when I walked through the door, everything had changed. Her in-laws, strangers to me, were living in my room, wearing my slippers. When I asked what was going on, my daughter tossed me a blanket and said, "The garage has space." No apology, no shame, just cold practicality. So I did what no one expected. I grabbed my bag, called a car, and left. 3 hours later, I stepped into my $1.2 million villa. And 3 weeks after that, she came begging for shelter. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment. What would you do if your own daughter tried to put you in the garage while her in-laws slept in your bed? I didn't expect a hero's welcome. But I certainly didn't expect this. When I finally came home from the hospital, it was snowing. Not the soft, postcard kind of snow, but the biting, wet kind that hits your face like gravel. My breath came shallow, each exhale fogging the cab window as the driver slowed in front of the house. For a moment, I just stared at it. The place I had paid for, lived in, contributed every penny I could scrape after selling my own home. I told myself to expect a warm welcome, maybe even a banner from the kids or a bowl of soup waiting inside. But as the meter clicked, I knew. No one was waiting for me. My ribcage still ached from the surgery. Triple bypass, they said. Textbook recovery, the doctor had told me. But walking felt like lifting bricks, and every cough felt like punishment. Still, I had imagined Adeline would come. Even if Carl was too busy, I expected my daughter to pick me up. Instead, she had answered the phone at the checkout counter of some discount store, told me she was tied up, and hung up before I could ask if Tommy had made the baseball team. I paid the driver, gave him a 20, and told him to keep the change. My steps toward the front door felt heavier than they should have been. The house looked different. Brighter lights in the front room, a large pair of boots by the steps, voices faint behind the door that didn't belong. My fingers trembled as I pulled the key from my coat pocket. The lock clicked. It still worked. I had not been locked out. That gave me a moment's comfort, until the door opened and silence met me. Then I saw the coats on the hook, none of them mine. A woman's scarf I had never seen, a heavy winter coat too large for Carl. And the scent, strong perfume and a pungent aftershave I had never worn. I moved into the living room, and there they were. 2 strangers sitting on the couch I had bought. A man flipping through a TV guide like he owned the place. A woman knitting something with her feet on the ottoman Martha had once polished every week, like clockwork. They both looked up at me. Not surprised, not even embarrassed. From the hallway came Adeline's voice, casual like she had not left me, stranded on a hospital discharge day. "Dad, you're early." No hug, no welcome, not even a question about how I was feeling. Just that. I could not find the words at first. I stood frozen, suitcase in hand, as the woman on the couch looked me up and down and then went back to her knitting. Adeline stepped forward, brushing past me like I was a neighbor, not her father, not the man who sold his house and gave her $180,000 for her down payment. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow," she said. "Carl mentioned your doctor was thinking of holding you longer." Then she added with a kind of cheerful venom, "But I guess plans changed." I asked her who those people were. She raised an eyebrow like the question was ridiculous. Carl's parents. They needed somewhere to stay while their kitchen gets remodeled, temporary. Her smile dropped. "Your room was available." I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the word she used, available, landed like a slap. That room was mine. It had my clothes, my photographs, the cedar box with Martha's ring tucked beneath the drawer. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked. She looked past me to the sliding glass door and pointed. "The garage is insulated. We put a cot out there and there's a heater. It's better than the hospital, right?" I walked through the house in a daze. My room was unrecognizable. Their things were everywhere. His boots by the dresser, her curling iron on my nightstand. Even the framed photo of me and Martha from our 30th anniversary had been turned face down. The closet was stuffed with coats and sweaters that did not belong to anyone I knew. I opened a drawer, hoping to find at least one of my books. But it had been emptied, filled with Vera's hairbrush and reading glasses. The last time I had seen that drawer was when I tucked Martha's last letter inside it. I did not bother to check if it was still there. I walked back into the hallway. Tommy and Lily were nowhere in sight. Probably asleep. Probably told not to bother Grandpa. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping to find some tea. Maybe something to take the bitterness out of my mouth. Instead, I found Carl sitting at the island, scrolling on his phone, pretending not to notice me. We figured the garage was the best option, he muttered without looking up. "You got everything you need in there. Space heater, cot, even an extension cord for your CPAP." I nodded slowly. My chest hurt again, the kind of hurt that wasn't from surgery. That night, I sat in the garage, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like mothballs. The cot creaked every time I shifted. The heater hummed too loudly. They had run an extension cord through the dog door. My breath fogged in the air above me. Beside the cot, someone had left a bottle of aspirin and a half-empty thermos of what I assumed was tea. It was cold. At that moment, something hardened inside me. Not just my heart, but something deeper, something older. I thought about the house I had grown up in, the one my uncle had left behind, a place I had not seen in years, somewhere near Lake Michigan. I still remembered the old stone steps, the brass key hidden behind the third porch post. My uncle's letters, his stories about solitude, about legacy. I had ignored his offer for years, thinking I was needed here. I now realized I had mistaken need for convenience. They never needed me. They used me. I took out my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. A property agent in New Buffalo answered. "I was wondering," I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking, "if the Olson property is still maintained." There was a pause, a soft clack of keyboard keys. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Caretaker goes by weekly. We keep it heated in winter as per instructions." I nodded. How soon could I access it? She paused again. "It's yours, Mr. Olson. Anytime you like." I placed the phone back on the cold metal shelf, looked once more at the garage walls that had become my prison, and decided I would be gone before sunrise. That decision gave me a strange kind of clarity. The pain from my chest no longer felt like a weight dragging me down, but like a warning bell telling me that staying any longer would cost more than I could afford. I quietly gathered the few things I still owned. The cardigan Martha had bought for me on our anniversary, a shaving kit buried under a pile of tools, and the worn photograph of her that I had hidden inside an old glove for safekeeping. Outside, the wind clawed at the eaves of the house, but I welcomed the cold. It was honest, unpretending, unlike the people sleeping warm and unbothered just a few feet away. By the time the sky began turning a dull blue, I had already slipped out through the side door, careful not to make a sound. The backpack hung low on my shoulder, and my breath came out in visible puffs as I trudged down the sidewalk. I did not even glance at the house behind me. Every step away from it felt like a stitch being pulled from a wound that had been poorly sewn. I reached the corner store 2 blocks down and called a cab. The driver who picked up sounded like he had just woken up, but I gave the address anyway and waited on the curb. As I stood there, I realized how different the world looked when you no longer had an address of your own. Even the street lamps seemed to hum with a kind of indifference, and the early morning fog refused to lift. When the taxi pulled up, I climbed into the back seat without speaking. The driver, a young man with heavy eyes, looked at me through the rearview mirror and asked where to. I hesitated for only a moment before reciting the address of the place I had never told anyone about. Harold's Villa. It was in a quiet lakeside town called Shorebend, a 3-hour drive from Chicago. My brother had left it to me after he passed, but I had never gone there. I had treated it like a relic of the past, a memory of his eccentric life and distant choices. But now, it represented something entirely different. It was mine, untouched, undemanding, and most importantly, not built on anyone else's conditions. The drive passed in silence. I stared out the window at the dark fields and occasional flicker of headlights as we passed other early risers. Somewhere between the towns, the driver stopped for gas, and I used the station's bathroom to wash my face. The mirror showed a man I barely recognized. My cheeks were sunken, and my eyes had that glazed look people get after a long hospital stay or a deep betrayal. I splashed cold water over my face and took a breath so deep it felt like my lungs might crack. When I returned to the car, the driver asked if I was sure this was the right address. I nodded and gave no explanation. We pulled into the long, tree-lined driveway of the villa just after 10 in the morning. Snow had piled up along the edges, but the path had been cleared recently, likely by a local caretaker who still made the rounds out of habit. The house rose from the landscape like something out of an older time. The stone facade bore the marks of age, but the structure stood proud and unyielding. 2-story windows looked down like silent sentinels, and the wraparound porch curved elegantly toward the frozen lake beyond. The sight of it made my throat tighten. I paid the driver, thanked him, and stood alone as he drove away, the sound of tires crunching on gravel fading into the silence. The key turned in the lock with a little resistance, but the door opened, groaning softly as if waking from a long sleep. The foyer smelled of cedar, dust, and a hint of old varnish. I walked through room after room, opening curtains and letting light spill into spaces that had waited patiently for someone to return. Furniture stood covered in white sheets. Books still filled the shelves in Harold's library. A chessboard with pieces mid-game sat under a window, untouched since the day he passed. The kitchen was functional, though outdated. The fridge was empty, but the cupboards held enough dry goods to make do for a while. I found a set of clean linens in the upstairs closet, made the bed in the master bedroom, then sank into the mattress, more exhausted than I had realized. Sleep came hard and deep. I woke hours later, unsure of the time, but the light outside had dimmed. I sat up slowly, waiting for the ache in my chest to settle before heading downstairs. I lit a fire in the living room, using the logs stacked by the hearth, and sat there for what felt like hours, just staring into the flames. The heat crept back into my body, but it did little to thaw the sense of betrayal that clung to me like frost. I had always known Adeline had her flaws, but I never imagined she would trade her father's dignity for a rent payment and expect him to accept it in silence. That was the part that replayed in my mind over and over. The assumption that I would stay, that I would say thank you for the garage, for the scraps of attention, for the chance to be close to my grandchildren under strict conditions. The next day, I ventured into town. Shore Bend was small but well kept, with a general store, a diner, and a post office all within walking distance. People nodded as I passed, and I returned their greetings quietly. I bought bread, coffee, and a few canned goods, then returned to the villa with a strange sense of gratitude. It was not much, but it was mine, and it did not come with expectations or warnings. I spent the next 3 days cleaning the house, restoring heat to rooms that had gone cold, and unpacking the few belongings I had brought. Every photograph I placed, every drawer I organized, felt like a small reclaiming of my life. On the 4th evening, as the sun dipped low and the lake reflected a pale, golden hue, I checked the voicemail on my phone for the first time. There were 6 missed calls from Adeline. I played the most recent message. Her voice came through thin and hesitant. She said she had been thinking that maybe she had acted out of stress, that things had gotten out of control faster than she expected. She asked where I was. She said the kids missed me. There was no apology, no admission, just the usual careful wording designed to open a door without fully stepping through it. I deleted the message without replying. Later that night, as I stood at the upstairs window overlooking the lake, I saw a pair of headlights appear on the distant road. At first, I assumed it was a passing car, but the vehicle slowed as it neared the property. It turned into the driveway. My heartbeat, still fragile from the surgery, quickened as the car crept closer. The tires made soft crunching sounds against the snow-covered gravel. Whoever it was had driven a long way to reach a place they had not been invited to. And then the car stopped, its engine idling near the porch. The driver did not get out right away. I stayed behind the curtain, watching, waiting, wondering who had decided to follow me to the one place that was meant to be mine alone. My breath fogged the cold window as the car rolled to a halt at the base of the circular driveway. Headlights cut through the evening mist, blinding me for a moment. I blinked hard and squinted through the veil of frost. The vehicle was unfamiliar. A modest silver sedan, not the gaudy SUV my daughter flaunted like a status symbol. The engine idled for a moment before cutting out. Then came the quiet. Footsteps on gravel. A door closed gently. I heard the soft squeal of worn shoes pressing snow into the stone pathway. Whoever this was, they were not in a hurry, but they were not timid either. I stayed still, eyes fixed on the silhouette approaching my front porch. When the knock came, 3 deliberate raps, I froze. Not because I was afraid, I was calculating. No one should have known I was here, not even Adeline. I had made sure of that. This house had been a secret passed down through hushed conversations and folded letters. It was not on any documents connected to me, and the town barely remembered the last time the place had been lived in. So whoever was on the other side of that door either knew more than they should, or had guessed far too well. I made my way slowly to the door, not turning on the porch light. I wanted the upper hand, even in darkness. I opened it just a crack, the antique hinge groaning in protest. "Yes," I said, my voice firm but low. A figure stood beneath the overhang, bundled in a dark wool coat, snowflakes caught in her eyelashes. It was not Adeline. It was Sarah, the waitress from the local diner. She looked smaller than I remembered, younger too, though the lines around her eyes told a different story. "I hope I am not intruding," she said quietly. I heard from Mrs. Peterson that someone had finally moved into the old Olson place. Thought I would stop by with something warm." She held up a paper bag, the bottom already growing translucent from the soup container inside. I stepped back slowly and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said, unsure what else to offer. Her presence unsettled me, not in a threatening way, but in the way unexpected kindness always does when you have been surviving on suspicion. The heat from the wood stove had not yet filled the wide foyer, but it was warmer than outside. Sarah stepped in, removed her boots without being asked, and handed me the bag. "Tomato bisque, with basil," she added, wiping her hands on her coat. I figured whoever was here could probably use something better than canned beans. I motioned her toward the sitting room, unsure of my footing with this sudden guest. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. We sat in silence for a moment, as the fire cracked and hissed beside us. She looked around the room with something like reverence. "I used to come here as a girl," she said softly. "Your uncle let the neighborhood kids sled down the back hill every winter. We called it Castle Hill." I smiled faintly, the memory tugging at something long buried. "He kept that part out of the letters," I said, and she chuckled. "He always did keep a bit of mystery, your uncle." Her gaze lingered on the tall shelves of books and the old grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner. "Is it just you here now?" she asked, though not prying, just curious. "For now," I replied. The soup was hot and thick, and I ate slowly, letting the warmth spread through my chest. "You did not have to come out here," I said, once the bowl was half empty. "Most people do not bring strangers soup in this weather." Sarah smiled and shrugged. "Most people are not strangers if they are Olsons. Around here, that name still means something." She stood after a while, brushing imaginary crumbs from her coat. "I will not keep you. Just wanted to say welcome." I walked her to the door and watched as she disappeared into the snow-dusted twilight, her car tail lights vanishing down the winding path. I stood there for a moment, letting the wind bite my face. The feeling was not unwelcome. It reminded me I was still alive. That night, I slept deeper than I had in weeks. No overhead footsteps, no early morning door slams, no whispered arguments over who would clean the garage. Just silence and the crackle of embers in the hearth. Morning light crept across the bedroom walls as I woke to a different rhythm, the rhythm of my own choosing. I made coffee in the old percolator, the sound of it bubbling its way into a new ritual. I pulled back the curtains and watched the sun rise over Lake Michigan, the ice on its edges sparkling like broken glass. It was the first morning in years that I did not dread what waited beyond the door. By the end of that week, I had started cleaning the rooms one by one. The upstairs hall had not seen a broom in decades, and I tackled it like a man reclaiming something sacred. I found old furniture under white sheets, wardrobes still lined with cedar, a desk drawer that contained a bundle of letters my uncle never sent. I read them at night. His thoughts, his regrets, his fierce sense of justice. In every word, I saw the man I remembered and the one I was slowly becoming. But on the 7th morning, as I returned from a quiet walk along the lake edge, something felt off. The gravel path had new tire tracks, narrower than Sarah's sedan, and with a different pattern. I crouched beside them, pressing my fingers into the still frozen soil. These tracks were fresh. They had not been there at dawn. I stood slowly, my eyes scanning the tree line. Whoever had come had not knocked, had not left a note. Just appeared, lingered, and left. I moved through the house carefully, checking every window, latch, and door. Nothing had been forced, nothing taken. But a frame had shifted slightly on the hallway wall. A photograph. My wedding day with Martha. It was not where I left it. I knew this house now. Every creak and groove, every shadow. Someone had been inside. My mind ran through the possibilities, but only one truly frightened me. Someone knew where I was. Someone had come without my knowledge or permission. And someone had touched my memories. That night, I slept with the door locked and the fire poker beside the bed. I stared at the ceiling for hours, heart steady but alert. I knew the quiet would not last. The past never stays buried, and neither does betrayal, especially when it wants something. Someone knew where I was. Someone had come without my knowledge or permission, and someone had touched my memories. Someone knew where I was. Someone had come without my knowledge or permission, and someone had touched my memories. The realization landed like a thunderclap inside my chest. I crossed the room in 3 strides and picked up the old family photo that had been placed perfectly upright on the mantel. It was the one from Adeline's high school graduation, the photo that had been packed away in a box in the basement closet, sealed since the day I moved in. I knew that because I had sealed it myself. Now it was on display, deliberately chosen, carefully positioned. I turned slowly and scanned the room. Nothing else appeared disturbed, but that meant little. Whoever had been here knew how to move without making a mess. That was worse. I checked the front door, locked, deadbolt still engaged. The back entrance? I hurried through the kitchen and found that door locked as well, but a faint mark on the tile, mud still wet, told me I was not imagining anything. Someone had entered. Someone who had either a key or knowledge of the spare hidden above the porch light. I reached up and checked the familiar ledge. The key was gone. Panic swelled at the edge of my thoughts, but I forced it down. I needed clarity, not fear. I stood in the foyer, thinking. Only 3 people knew I had inherited the villa: the estate attorney, the caretaker who brought the groceries, and a woman named Grace from the hardware store who remembered Uncle Walter. I trusted the first 2. That left Grace, or someone she may have talked to. The phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? There was silence at first, followed by a slow inhale. Then, unmistakably, Adeline's voice. Dad. I did not respond. She waited a beat, and then filled the silence with her usual flurry of half-excuses and emotional posturing. Please do not hang up. I know what we did was awful, but I need to talk to you. I know where you are, but I have not told Carl. He does not even know I called. I came alone. I needed to see you. I left something on the mantel. I hope you saw it. The chill in her voice was different this time. Not calculated, not manipulative, almost desperate. I let her talk, listened to every word. She was at a motel down the road. She had been watching the property from a distance, waiting for a moment when I might not be inside. But curiosity had gotten the better of her. She had used the old key she found on my ring 2 months ago. She still remembered where I used to hide it. She had come inside while I was asleep and placed the photo there as a message, her idea of a peace offering. I want to talk in person, she said quietly. Face to face, just us. I was still silent. The phone buzzed again. A new message appeared from the same number. A picture of Tommy and Lily standing outside a rundown apartment building with chipped paint and cracked sidewalks. A handwritten note held in Lily's hands read, "We miss you, Grandpa." My throat tightened. I ended the call without a word and stared at the photo for a long time. The message was clear. She knew I had chosen to separate myself from her, but she was going to use my love for the children to find a way back in. I hated that it worked. My fingers trembled slightly as I placed the picture back down. If she wanted a meeting, I would give her one. But not here. The diner in town was quiet the next morning. I arrived early and sat in a booth near the back where I could see the door. The waitress, an older woman named Marla, poured coffee without asking. "You expecting company?" she asked, nodding to the empty seat across from me. I nodded once, and she moved on. At precisely 10 past 10, Adeline entered. Her eyes darted across the room, and when they met mine, she flinched before walking over. She sat without speaking, clasping her hands tightly in front of her. She looked thinner, hollow even. The makeup could not hide the sleepless nights. "Dad," she began, "before you say anything, please just let me explain." I said nothing. She took a breath and started talking about the house, the foreclosure, Carl's job loss, how his parents had vanished the moment the money stopped coming in, how she had tried to fix things but found herself sinking deeper, the bills, the school problems, the shame. Then her voice softened. I was wrong about everything. What I did, what we did to you. I have not slept properly since. Still, I remained silent. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "This is everything I have. Bank records, signed papers giving you full custody if you want it. Carl will not fight it. He knows he has no right. The kids ask for you constantly. They are not doing well, Dad. They miss you. They need you." Her voice cracked. "I need you." That was when I spoke. My words were quiet, deliberate, sharpened by the weeks of silence. "You pointed to a doghouse." Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. "I remember. You let strangers take my bed." "I know. You said it was because they were paying rent." "I was wrong." "No," I said. "You were honest that day. That was who you really were." She recoiled like I had slapped her. "You are sitting here now because you lost everything, not because you changed." She opened her mouth and then closed it. I stood. "You can see the children on weekends. They can come live with me, but you and Carl are no longer welcome. Not at my home, not in my life." Her breath hitched. "You are punishing me." "No," I replied. "You punished yourself." I dropped a key on the table. "For the lawyer, I will be filing for guardianship Monday." She stared at the key like it was a weapon. "And if we get our lives together, then you can visit." I walked out without looking back. The sunlight was sharp on the street. The wind carried the scent of lake water and old pine. I stood for a moment beside my truck, breathing deep, steadying myself. Inside that diner, I had closed a door that had needed closing for years. But as I reached for the handle, I saw her through the window. Still sitting, still staring, one hand pressed to her lips like she might break in half. Back at the villa, I began preparing a room for Tommy and Lily. The nursery upstairs had been empty for decades, but I scrubbed every surface, painted the walls in colors I thought they would like, and brought in new furniture. I added a reading nook by the window and filled it with the books they used to beg me to read aloud. That evening, as I folded clothes into small drawers, my phone buzzed again. A single message. No words. Just a photo of Carl standing on my front porch. He was holding a clipboard. Behind him, 2 men in city uniforms stood waiting with toolkits. The message came from an unknown number. I stepped to the window, and there he was. Carl, standing on my porch with a clipboard and 2 city workers, like he owned the place. I stepped back from the window, my chest tightening, though not from the scar beneath my ribcage. It was something colder, deeper, more permanent. Carl was not just visiting. He had brought people with authority, people in uniforms and hard hats, people who did not look like they came to talk. I stayed out of sight as he laughed about something with one of them, flipping through a folder like it was his name on the deed. He gestured toward the foundation, toward the side yard, then directly at the mailbox. My mailbox, my address, my home. And then he knocked. I could hear the wooden echo carry through the entrance hall. There was no warmth in it. This was not a family visit. This was a declaration. I waited, silent, my heart thudding like a drum against my chest, knowing full well they could not enter without cause. The knock came again, firmer. Still I said nothing. Then I heard Carl's voice, loud, smug, and sharpened with false concern. "Mr. Randall, we know you're in there. This is a routine assessment for property compliance. Just a quick inspection." A city inspection? That made no sense. The place had been registered in my name for years. Property taxes paid, utilities handled. Harland had left it to me free and clear. What game was Carl playing? I watched as the two workers took photos of the porch, the trim, the gutters. Carl peered through the side windows, his face close enough that I saw the creases around his mouth, the satisfied little twitch he got when he thought he had won. He motioned to the clipboard again. I could not hear the words, but I could read his posture. He had brought them here with a purpose, and it had nothing to do with maintenance. A few more minutes passed. They spoke to each other quietly. Carl pointed down the driveway toward the road, and then, mercifully, they left. I remained frozen behind the curtain, not moving until I saw the red taillights disappear behind the oak trees. My hands trembled, not with fear, but fury. Carl had followed me. He had tracked me here like a bloodhound on a scent. But how? And more importantly, why? It was not until evening, after the sun fell behind the lake and the manor was quiet again, that I allowed myself to exhale. I made tea, though I barely touched it, my mind spinning. This was not over. That clipboard meant paperwork. That visit meant strategy. Carl was building something, and it was not just an excuse to visit. He had brought the city to me. But to do what? I spent the next day on the phone, calling the township office under the guise of routine ownership inquiries. No permits had been filed, no complaints lodged, no inspections scheduled from their end. Whatever Carl had done, it was off the books or unofficial, which meant worse. Personal. 3 days later, a letter arrived. No postage. Just an envelope slid under the front door with my name scrawled across the front. I opened it carefully, expecting more bile or manipulation. But what I found was colder. Typed, formal, full of legal phrasing. Carl had filed a petition to challenge the inheritance on the basis of mental fitness. His claim? That I had undergone major heart surgery and was now unfit to manage large estates or assets, and that in the interest of family protection, he was requesting joint control of the property, pending review. It was like reading a knife in written form. They were coming for the manor. They had not been able to guilt me back into the doghouse, so now they were attempting to take what I had rebuilt. My chest burned with betrayal, but I kept reading. A court date, 2 weeks, filed in Chicago, filed in the same jurisdiction where Adeline and Carl still held ties. It was coordinated, and it was not just cruel. It was calculated. I sat at Harlan's desk, the leather still soft beneath my fingers, the scent of old cedar wrapping around me like a cloak. He had warned me. His letter had been clear. Kindness is often mistaken for weakness. I would not be weak again. That night, I pulled out the thick manila folder Harland had left. Inside, I found more than I remembered. Old property records, notarized statements, photos, letters. Some of it personal, but some of it legal. Backup plans, proof of title, a copy of the will with multiple notarizations, and even a statement of mental clarity signed by 2 doctors from the time Harland had written it. I had what I needed. I would not be taken by surprise again. 1 week before the court date, I hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Harland's lawyer, an old friend of the family named Joseph Reeder, who still practiced in a small firm out of New Buffalo. He came to the house, shook my hand like an equal, and listened to every word. When I showed him the letter, he read it twice, his brow lowering with each sentence. "This is not going to stick," he said flatly. "But they are not aiming for a win. They are aiming for disruption. They want to wear you down." We prepared. Every document cataloged, every transfer accounted for. The money trail from my sale in Detroit all the way to their mortgage, my name on the wire transfers, the emails, the text messages from Adeline when she begged me to help. It was all there, and Joseph built it into a fortress. On the day of the hearing, I traveled back to Chicago with a calm I had not felt in years. No panic, no hesitation. I was not the father who had once slept in a garage or stood in silence while being pointed to a doghouse like some discarded stray. I was the rightful heir to my uncle's legacy, and I was ready to fight. The courtroom was small, civil, quiet, but the tension between us was thick enough to choke. Carl sat at the table across from me, his suit 2 sizes too new, his confidence stretched thin over desperation. Adeline was there too, clutching a folder but avoiding my eyes. Their lawyer made the opening argument, painting a picture of me as a confused, elderly man in need of family guidance. They tried to twist my time in the hospital into proof of fragility. They tried to spin my move to the manor as abandonment. But I said nothing. I let Joseph speak, and when it was my turn, I stood straight and read a statement I had written by hand. I detailed the garage, the betrayal, the money, the doghouse. I described the humiliation not as some twisted sob story, but as a timeline, a cause and effect. I explained how the money that built their comfort came from me, how the house they lived in for 2 years was bought by selling mine, how I had paid in full, not just financially, but emotionally. The judge listened, took notes, asked questions, and when it ended, she did not take long to rule. Petition denied, no shared control, inheritance affirmed, property confirmed in my name alone. The court clerk handed me the final signed order. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply folded it, slid it into my coat pocket, and walked out with Joseph by my side. It was done. They had tried to take my house, and they had failed. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, Joseph tapped my arm. "Do not relax yet," he said in a low voice. "Desperate people do not stop when they lose in court. They escalate." I turned back toward the courthouse steps and saw Carl speaking urgently on the phone, his face red with rage, his eyes locked on me like this was not the end, but the beginning of something worse. I did not flinch. I kept walking, the sealed manila folder tucked under my arm like a shield. He could glare all he wanted, spit fire into that phone, summon lawyers or conjure schemes. But he no longer held the upper hand. Whatever storm he thought he could bring, I had already weathered worse. I had survived betrayal, eviction, humiliation, and recovery. What I had now could not be taken back with a signature or a tantrum. The town square was unusually quiet for a Friday afternoon. The stone fountain trickled behind me, and somewhere nearby, a flag whipped in the late spring wind. My steps were slow but steady. Each footfall down the courthouse steps felt like a declaration. He wanted war. He would get none. He had already lost the only battle that mattered, the one for my trust. As I reached the bottom step, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Adeline, again. The third missed call since the court adjourned. I did not answer. She had made her choices long before the bank took her house. She had made them while I was unconscious on an operating table, when she emptied my room and handed the keys to strangers, when she gestured toward that doghouse without a sliver of shame. That moment had drawn a permanent line. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to the law office I had retained quietly weeks earlier. The secretary greeted me with a respectful nod. "Mr. Olson, Attorney Reese is expecting you." In the quiet conference room, we reviewed the documents together one last time. The new deed was airtight, transferring ownership of my uncle's estate completely and irreversibly into my name. But more importantly, the updated will was signed and witnessed. No loopholes, no contested claims, no room for interpretation. Adeline and Carl had been removed as heirs, permanently. "If anything should happen to me," I said calmly, "the children inherit directly. Not a cent passes through their parents' hands." Attorney Reese adjusted his glasses, nodding with quiet approval. "This arrangement protects both your legacy and the children's future. It is firm." "Good," I said. "Let us keep it that way." Outside, the wind had picked up. Clouds began to gather in slow, swirling layers, like the sky itself was reflecting the weight of the moment. I walked past the bakery where I used to bring Tommy for blueberry muffins, past the bookstore where Lily had picked out her first fairy tale collection. The whole town was familiar now. Mine in a way no place had ever been, not Detroit, not Adeline's cold house, not even the hospital where I had felt most invisible. Back at the manor, silence wrapped around me like an old quilt. The oak trees swayed gently, and the lake shimmered behind them like a sheet of silver. This house had watched generations rise and fall, had weathered losses and found renewals. And now it held me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood at the wide kitchen window, the ceramic mug warm in my hand. I expected them the next day. I was wrong. That night, just past 10, I heard tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the old stone walls. I turned off the lamp in the foyer and stood in the dark. I wanted to see them before they saw me. Carl's Civic pulled to a halt just inches from the porch. Adeline jumped out first, still in heels despite the hour, and banged on the door. Carl followed, holding something in a manila envelope, his shoulders hunched in that familiar predator's posture, like a man about to deliver an ultimatum. They still thought they could bluff their way in. I opened the door just wide enough to be heard. "It is late." Adeline's voice cracked. "We need to talk." Carl held up the envelope like a magician revealing his last trick. "We spoke to someone. There is a legal way to contest your inheritance." I said nothing, just waited. "If the house was obtained through undue influence," he said slowly, "if your uncle was mentally compromised, the court can open the case." Adeline added, "You always said he was eccentric. That could help us." They stood there on the porch, 2 people so drunk on entitlement they could not see how pathetic they looked, so willing to rewrite history, to weaponize my uncle's quirks into legal angles. My silence seemed to unnerve them more than any shouting ever could. I stepped onto the porch, locking the door behind me with a deliberate click. "You want to accuse the man who gave me this house of being crazy?" "It is not personal," Carl replied, already defensive. "It is business." I laughed once, cold and short. "You're too late. The court reviewed everything. The deed is solid. The will is final. And I have already changed it. What do you mean? Adeline asked, stepping forward. I kept my voice even. It means when I die, your children inherit this place. You do not. Not even a light bulb. Carl's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Adeline's eyes filled, but I saw no regret. Only panic. You are punishing us, she said, her voice rising. We are your family. No, I said. Family does not sell your dignity for rent money. Carl tried to step past me. I blocked him with nothing more than my posture. You are trespassing. The sheriff has been notified that this property is private and not open to visitation without invitation. This is your final warning. You think you can erase us? Adeline cried. No, I said again. You did that yourselves. They left 15 minutes later, after realizing I meant every word. I watched them go without anger, only resolve. The next weekend, Tommy and Lily arrived as usual. Tommy ran to the garden, showing me how the cucumber plants had sprouted. Lily held up a picture of a red cardinal with wide wings and a heart floating above it. This is you, Grandpa, she said. You flew away from the mean house and made a good nest. I nodded. That is exactly what I did. Later that afternoon, while the children napped in their separate rooms upstairs, I sat in the study with the envelope from Attorney Reese. Inside was a copy of my final will and a letter I had written to each grandchild. I wanted them to know what happened, not just the facts, but the reasons. That love was not weakness. That dignity could not be bought. That sometimes saying no was the most loving thing you could ever do. The manor was quiet when the second set of tires rolled up the drive. I checked the time. Sunday evening, unannounced. Again. I met them at the door. Carl stood on my porch with two new faces, attorneys judging by the briefcases, and Adeline behind them, her expression unreadable, her eyes refusing to meet mine. I did not move. I let the silence hang like thick fog between us, unmoving, unwelcoming. The air had turned brisk, late autumn biting at the skin, but I did not reach for my coat. I wanted them to feel the cold, to remember that this was not their territory. The taller of the two men stepped forward, squinting at a clipboard and attempting a smile that never reached his eyes. Mr. Olson, I'm Trevor Hines, representing Mr. Carl Benson and Miss Adeline Benson in a matter of real estate and family settlement. May we speak inside? I stared at him, and then let my eyes drift to Carl, who could not hold my gaze for more than 2 seconds. Adeline's hands were clenched tightly in front of her, and though she did not say a word, her foot tapped a nervous rhythm on the porch. I gave them nothing, no greeting, no warmth. If you have something to say it here. I don't hold conversations in my home with people trying to rob me of it. Trevor exchanged a glance with the shorter lawyer, a pudgy man with slicked back hair and a folder tucked under one arm. They looked surprised. Maybe they expected the same meek man who once folded under every guilt trip and threat. Not today. Very well, Trevor said. He cleared his throat and flipped through a stack of documents. Our clients believe there may have been some confusion or manipulation regarding the transfer of ownership of Olson Manor. It appears your late uncle, Harland Olson, may have been under mental duress or undue influence when drafting the deed, naming you as the sole beneficiary. My jaw twitched. You mean when he gave me his house? The one no one else bothered to visit in 20 years? The pudgy lawyer took his turn. Mr. Olson, we're not here to argue sentiment. We're simply trying to ensure that the assets are distributed fairly. Carl and Adeline, being direct family through marriage and blood, believe they are entitled to a portion of this estate. Perhaps a settlement could avoid escalation. Carl stepped forward now, his voice slick with confidence that did not match the desperation in his eyes. We're not here to fight, Burl. We just want what's fair. You have a huge place here, and we're struggling. The court will see that. They'll understand this is about equity, not greed. I laughed, a sound so sharp it made Adeline flinch. You want to talk about fairness? You moved strangers into my room while I was recovering from heart surgery. You pointed to a doghouse and told me to sleep there. You stole the home I paid for and profited off of it. And now that I have something you want, you show up with lawyers and call it fairness? Adeline finally found her voice. It was quieter than I remembered, but colder. You are using the children to hurt us. You took them away, and you are turning them against their parents. That was the line she had chosen? Not regret, not apology. Accusation. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but kept my voice steady. Tommy and Lily are thriving. They have stability, peace, and a roof over their heads. Something you could not provide because you were too busy exploiting your father for rent money. Do not dare twist this into some noble cause. Trevor raised his hands, a mock gesture of diplomacy. Mr. Olson, perhaps we can revisit this with clearer heads. We are prepared to file a petition to freeze the estate and examine the conditions under which it was transferred. We advise you seek representation. I had already done that. I walked into the house, returned moments later with a leather folder, and handed it over. Here's my attorney's letter. You will find that Uncle Harlan's mental clarity was assessed by a state-appointed doctor 2 months before his passing. Not only was he of sound mind, but he also filed his estate plan through 2 separate channels, legal and private. I am the sole inheritor. Any challenge you file will cost you, not me. Carl's smile disappeared. Adeline's shoulders drooped ever so slightly. She knew it. I saw it in her eyes. She knew they were not here to get justice. They were here because they were broke and scared and had nowhere left to turn. I stepped forward, inches from Carl now. You have a choice. You can continue this path. Burn every last bridge and find yourselves not only penniless, but alone. Or you can walk away right now and hope that one day your children forgive you. Carl's jaw clenched. You think money buys forgiveness? No, I said. But betrayal costs a lot more. I turned slowly, letting the moment settle before I stepped back inside and shut the door firmly in their faces. From the window, I watched them argue. The 2 lawyers looked frustrated. Carl was shouting now, jabbing a finger in Adeline's direction. She stood rigid, tears in her eyes, and finally turned and walked away toward the car without looking back. Carl hesitated, threw something at the railing, then followed. Tires crunched on gravel as they left the manor, and I finally let the curtain fall. The children were at school, and I had hoped today would be quiet. It turned out to be something better. A full circle moment. The same people who thought I was helpless were now the ones pleading from the outside. That evening, I picked Tommy and Lily up from their after-school art club. They ran toward me laughing, arms filled with drawings and stories. We stopped for hot cocoa on the way home, and Lily told me about the cardinal nest near the school's front tree. Do you think they know where home is, Grandpa? Even when it gets cold? I smiled. The smart ones do. They go where they are safe, where they are wanted. At home, the fire was already crackling in the library. Tommy curled up in the chair with his adventure book, and Lily sat on the floor working on a new painting. I added more wood to the fire and looked around at the warm, safe world we had built. One that no lawyer, no threat, and no betrayal could touch anymore. The phone rang just as I set down the kettle. I knew the number. Adeline. I let it ring once, twice, then picked it up. "Hello," her voice cracked. "We are dropping the case. The lawyer said we do not stand a chance. I just thought you should know." I did not speak. She filled the silence, like she always did. I saw the kids through the window. They look happy, healthier. They are better with you. Still, I said nothing. Carl is going back to live with his parents. I do not know what I am going to do yet, but I do not want to make this worse. I just wanted to say, thank you for not destroying us completely. My grip tightened around the receiver. She was not here to grovel or manipulate, not today. She sounded like someone who had finally run out of excuses. "You have a long way to go, Adeline, but at least now you have started walking." "May I see them?" she asked. "The children?" I took a long breath. "You may visit next weekend. They deserve to see their mother, but it will be here, with me, under my roof." Her silence told me she had expected that answer, maybe even accepted it. "Thank you, Dad." It had been a long time since I heard that word from her without a price tag attached. After I hung up, I returned to the fire and sat in Uncle Harlan's chair. The manor felt different tonight. Not just safe, powerful. A fortress built on love, blood, betrayal, and finally, justice. The kind of justice that takes years to grow roots and only blooms when you stop feeding weeds. Upstairs, the children were brushing their teeth. I heard laughter. Real, unburdened laughter. The kind that only comes when a child feels safe enough to forget. I looked out at the darkened driveway, where they once stood, and whispered to the silence, "You do not get to come back. Not like before." The porch light flickered behind me as I shut the door slowly, each inch sealing away the chaos they had brought with them. My home, no, my sanctuary, returned to stillness. The hush of the house felt different now. It was no longer filled with dread or anticipation. It was filled with choice, my choice. In the living room, Tommy's colored pencil drawing still hung on the wall. Lily's shoes sat under the bench, muddy from the garden. Their laughter from earlier echoed faintly in my ears, a balm against the war that had nearly torn us apart. I knew then I had not lost a family. I had reclaimed one. I walked to Uncle Norman's desk and opened the leather-bound journal he had left behind. I wrote one final entry. I was not thrown away. I was freed. When they stripped me of their expectations, they unknowingly handed me back my worth. I will protect what remains, not out of vengeance, but out of love. I closed the book gently, set it beside the envelope that held my updated will, and turned off the lamp. Outside, the lake shimmered under moonlight, calm and endless. Inside, 2 children slept peacefully, never again to be used as pawns. And me? I was no longer broken. I was a man who had chosen peace over permission. Tomorrow would come, and I would greet it, not as the victim of betrayal, but as the keeper of a legacy, rewritten by my own hand. If you like this story, subscribe and tell us about your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next one, click on the box on the screen.